Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. In this video, what I want to do is talk about the concept of dependency injection, and I'm going to just kind of give sort of a very loose example, because dependency injection in practice can look a lot of different ways depending on what framework you're using, what library, the way that whoever implemented a dependency injection style did. Okay, so dependency injection looks very different in something like Java Spring, which is like, it's all like Java in itself is all built around objects. So dependency injection is a very typical pattern. You also, if you use the Angular front-end framework, you probably know dependency injection through like adding things like the HTTP module or the forms module to your app module. And also in JavaScript, if you've used like frameworks like Express and Koa, you've probably seen, to a lesser degree, dependency injection with middleware. So middleware in itself isn't necessarily dependency injection, but some middleware does that in the sense that it adds new functionality that wasn't there before. So first, let's just talk about the concept. This is a object-oriented programming design pattern. Well, maybe that's the wrong word, but it's a strategy or a tactic when constructing your objects. And the idea here is this. You have an object with core functionality. It's the functionality you always need every time you instantiate that object. So let's imagine like a web server. Okay, so we create an object that is a web server. That web server kind of always needs to, there's certain things that it needs to always do. It needs to maybe listen. Okay, listen for incoming requests. So let's actually create that. So let's create a class. I'm doing this in JavaScript, but these principles can apply to pretty much any object-oriented programming language. So we'll say class web server. And okay, we're gonna have a constructor. And this constructor will take a config object. Okay. Cool. And we're going to basically say that all arguments will be passed into this one big object. So we'll just call that the config object. I always like doing it that way because I liked having the named properties. Okay, constructor, and we're going to say that this dot port. So basically, this web server will have a port that's going to listen on, and that's going to equal config.port because you'll pass in which port to listen to from there, and it'll have one method to start off with. Okay, we'll just call this listen, and listen takes no arguments, and all it's going to do is just say console.log listening on port this dot port. Needless to say, if you're watching up to this point, if you haven't seen any of my videos on object-oriented programming, you should probably watch those first, especially if you're like coming from JavaScript. I have a whole series on object-oriented programming in JavaScript and Ruby. That'll help, give you some of the background on this. So this class here, okay, has a constructor. That function runs when we create a web server. And that web server that we create will actually have one function out of the gate. And that's generally like sort of the minimum that a web server has. Now notice I didn't load any kind of HTTP library. This isn't actually a web server. This is just sort of a fake web server for the purposes of demonstrating. But now I could do this. So if you ever use like a web framework, you probably will look very familiar. I can be like const app equals new web server. And that new web server, we'll say, has a port of 4000. Okay, so far that, and then I can use that method app.listen, and let's see how my script runs so far. Scratch node scratch.js, and see it works. I created a new web server. It's theoretically listening. Again, it's just really a log, but you guys get the idea. But this web server might need to do other things. It might need to connect to databases. It needs to do routing. And maybe I don't want to build that functionality right away because if you don't need it, I don't want it, the less stuff that's into the get-go, like it'll make a smaller program, a slimmer program that needs less of those features faster. because you're not creating this giant object with a bunch of stuff. So maybe I'm saying, okay, we sometimes do want our web server to have other features, but you should inject them as you need them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan for that. So maybe what I'll do is I'm going to anticipate that there's going to be like an array of dependencies. So we're going to say config dot control Z config dot dependencies. Let me think how I want to do this. Yeah, config dot dependencies. Okay, or I'll just call them deps. Config dot deps dot for each. And then what I want to do is that for each dependency, which I'm anticipating are going to be functions. Again, this just goes into sort of the design when you're anticipating the design. These are the times where like using TypeScript would be nice, because then I can just kind of like illustrate the type. So maybe I should use TypeScript more often when I do these kind of lessons. But here we go. We'll just say dep dot dep, and then we're going to pass this. Okay, and essentially what I'm basically each dependency is going to be a function in which I pass this object to. Okay, and you'll see how I'll use that. Okay, so that's how I'm going to use that. Cool. Only thing I want to do is what if deps isn't there, or here's what we can do. To make sure that there's no error, I can always just create a default value. So by default, port will be 3000. Deps will be an empty array. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just assigning a default value for the parameter. So if I don't assign config, these are the default values for config. Okay, cool. So there we go. Now I've created the pattern for dependency injection. So this is my base class, just that. But let's say we wanted to include like connections, like routing, right? So I can say const router or route inject equals, and say the server will be the name of the parameter because we're passing this, which is the web server. And all this does is going to add methods to the server. So we'll say server.get equals console.log. This is a get route. And I can just kind of do this 4 times. Put post delete. Oh, well, yeah, I can use delete as a property name. Okay, cool. So now what I can do is when I create my new web server, I can create a deps array, and I can inject route inject. Okay, I can inject that function now. So now I should be able to actually use. So now I'll notice that now my app will have all these functions: app.get, app.post. So I've injected those dependencies. And see, this is a get route. Oh, I didn't change like the output. This is a put route. This is a post route. This is a delete route. Okay, let me just run that again. Okay, so that functionality was injected through dependency injection. And now the benefit of this is that in these methods, I could use the keyword this, depending on how I would have to actually write the syntax a little bit differently, but I would have access to all of that web server's properties, but I don't necessarily have to define these methods inside web server. So I can only add these methods if I need them. So maybe we need like a database. Maybe we want to connect to Postgres. Okay. So I can do something like this. PG connect or PG inject. And this equals, a similar pattern. Based on the way I designed the original object, there's now sort of a uniform way to create injections of new features. So basically, I create this core class, okay, and then other developers who want to inject functionality to this, they now know there's like a pattern to do so. They would just define functions in this way and do this kind of thing. So in this case, server.pgconnect equals, and then I'll just kind of keep following this. Console.log, connected to database. Okay, that's gonna be server. That's server. Okay, and then maybe we have a server.query. Okay, console.log, query database. Okay, and then when I run, now I can inject this dependency. So I can inject this dependency, pg inject. And now I'm able to add that. And again, if I don't want one or the other, I can not include it in my dependency array. So I'm injecting different dependencies into my class. So this allows you to create a core class with core functionality, but make it extendable by having some sort of mechanism for injecting dependencies. And again, all it's doing is just looping over the array and then invoking each function and passing in the object itself in there, so that way I can add the methods. So then app essentially becomes server. I add these functions to app, and now app has these functions. So now I can do like app.pgconnect, app.query, and see, app is starting to have this growing list of methods because I keep injecting all these dependencies. And there we go. See, connected to DB, query database. Okay, and that's it. That's all dependency injection is. So if you're using Angular and or when you do something like the HTTP client module, and then you kind of inject that into your components constructor, you're just doing dependency injection. You're just saying, okay, here's this feature that it doesn't come with out of the box. I want to add it, so I'm going to inject it here. Or if you're using Java Spring, okay, you're doing the same thing through like annotations and whatnot. So, and you can do this in any language. It's just literally again, more of a class thing. I mean, theoretically, you could kind of do it in functions, or you can kind of simulate it in functions, but this is really more of a object-oriented type pattern. The idea is you have the class that can create an object with a core set of features, but the object is designed in a way to be extended. And those extensions are your dependencies, and they are injected into that core object. That's the concept. That's the idea. Okay? So web server out of the gate really only has this one function, listen. But by having a dependency injection workflow, by having a way of injecting dependencies, I'm able to extend it to have all these other functions. So when I created an instance of web server in this variable called app, it had access to all these other methods. So that's the idea. If you guys like the video, do give the video a like, subscribe to the channel. Go head over to devnursery.com and go check out my blog, check out my other videos, join the Discord and Slack channel, and I will see you guys later on. Have a great day and enjoy.